Welcome back to episode 2 of the Minecraft tutorial series where I teach you how to make Minecraft mods without coding. Today we are going to be looking at how to make blocks, and we're going to be making ender log, some ender planks, and a brand new ore. Alright, so let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to make is going to be the ender planks. Just a pretty basic block. So we're going to come and add a new block. I'm going to call these ender planks and create new block. And this might look a little bit more complicated than the item that you're used to. But don't worry, it'll all make sense soon enough. So up here under block model, there's actually two that we use normally. And normal is going to have a different texture on each side of the block. So think of something like a furnace, which has a different side texture, top, bottom, and front. But for planks, it's going to be the exact same actually on every side. And so we can set this to single texture. Now the other ones here, for instance, cross model will make it look like grass, where it kind of has a cross. But we're going to go with single texture. And once again, setting textures is the exact same. You can create one or you can import one. Like I said, I've already created textures for these, so I'm just going to import the ender planks. And there we go. We can just double click on it. And this is a nice like purple wood, which isn't really something that we have in the game right now. Now note that since we're set on single texture, we only have to set this main one, but if we were to set normal, we'd have to set a texture for every single side. Now this block item texture is going to be the texture that shows up in your inventory and in your hand. For instance, saplings, even though they are blocks, have a flat sort of texture instead of the 3D texture that we're used to with blocks. And so you could set this to anything and just make it look like a regular item. And the block particle texture is going to be what the break particles look like. So if you wanted to set this to something different than this texture, you can make the break particles look different. This block base here will set what kind of block you're making. So you can make all of these different types of blocks. Most of the time you're going to want to leave this on the basic block, but you can make things like stairs, slabs, fences, you know, all of these different options here, and they'll actually have functionality like you would come to expect. For this right column here, the rotation mode affects how the block rotates. And there's a couple of options here which don't make that much sense at first glance, but I'm going to go over them one at a time. Now these first two here rotate based on how you're facing when you place them. This one would be like a furnace, where it will always rotate so that the front is facing towards the player. This one here would be more like a piston, where it can also face up and down. This one can never face up, like you never have a furnace facing upwards. Now these next two are the same, but they actually rotate from the face of the block that you click on. So for instance, instead of facing towards the player, it will face kind of away from the block that you're placing it on, if that makes any sense. Log rotation here is something that we're going to use in just a minute. It rotates just the way that normal vanilla logs do, which is based on the block that you place them on. But since this is just a plank, and it's the same on every side anyway, we're just going to have no rotation. And pitch rotation here is something like a lever, where it can be placed on the top or the bottom or the side of a block, but can also rotate. Like for instance, if you place a lever on the ceiling, you can still rotate which way it's facing. So if you're making something like a lever that can be placed on blocks like that, you might want to check that on. This one controls whether the block is waterloggable or not. So if you could put water inside of it. For things like slabs and not fully solid blocks, you might want to check this. Next up is the transparency. So you're only going to want to check this if your actual block has transparent elements inside of the texture. Otherwise, you can leave this off and leave this on solid. Now these options right here are what type of transparency you have in the texture. You're going to want to pick cutout if you have sections of your texture that are completely transparent. This would be something like glass, for instance, and you're going to want to pick translucent if you have something like ice, where it's not fully transparent, but the opacity is less than fully solid. So you'll be able to slightly see through it, but you'll also be able to see the block on top of it. But we're just going to leave this at solid since it is a solid block. And connected sides is something that should be used with things like glass. It makes the inner sides of a block connected. Like when you look through glass, you don't see every side of the glass through it, because that would look busy and wouldn't look very good. So you would want to check this if you're making something transparent like that. And then hiding the fluid texture when submerged. This is actually when you're inside of the block, like when you push the block over your head, will you see the texture of the block or not? Most of the time with stone and things, it will like obscure your vision, but when you get your head stuck in glass, you don't actually see that. You just see through it. So you would want to check this again if you're making something pretty transparent. Next up is tinting. So if your blocks are something like grass or leaves, they actually change color depending on the biome that you're in. And you're just going to want to pick the one here that your block is the closest to. So if you're making, you know, leaves, you'd click foliage, grass is grass, and that's all because they tint slightly differently. And you're actually going to want to make whatever you're trying to tint be grayscale. Like for instance, this is actually the texture of the top of a grass block. It's completely gray like this, and it just gets tinted dependent on the biome. monochrome. And if you have this turned on, you're generally going to want to check this one as well, which will tint the item in your inventory too. Otherwise, you'd have weird white grass inside of your inventory, which you definitely don't want. Random model offset is good for things like flowers that aren't placed perfectly in the center of the block every time. They'll actually randomly be placed somewhere within that block. And the two options here are either XZ or XYZ. And if you pick this first one, it will only move forward and backward and left and right on the block, whereas this one will also be able to vertically move up a little bit. Generally, this one makes the most sense, and this is what plants use in the main game. And special information here is the same as items. It's the little description that shows up underneath the items. On to the next page, and we have bounding boxes. And this will actually set the box around the block, which you'll be able to interact with. Now, blocks can have multiple bounding boxes. As you can see here, we can add multiple. And this is generally useful when you're making custom models, which will have different shapes. Things like hoppers that don't have a perfectly square box when you hover over them. But for instance, for our basic block, we're just going to want to leave it like this. And you can kind of understand, hopefully, the format that this is in, where you have the minimum coordinates and then the maximum coordinates relative to the block that it will be applied to. So 0 being the bottom left corner and then 16 being the top right corner. And then you can also turn on subtract. And what this will do if you have multiple bounding boxes is it will subtract this one from the first one. So if we were to make something between like, oh, I don't know, 0 and 4, this would have a little cutout in the bottom corner where there wouldn't be a box. But of course, this is a normal block, so we're just going to leave this. Another thing of note is this can walk through the block. And if you turn this on, it will act like something like a torch that you can just completely walk through and not be affected by this bounding box whatsoever. Next up, we're on to state properties. And this is pretty similar to items, where blocks have properties attached to them and they can show up differently depending on their properties. For a good example of this, you can click on this add existing property, and this is all of the properties in vanilla Minecraft. So you might notice something like cracked, and this controls whether stone bricks are cracked or not. And of course, they change their texture depending on how they are. You have things like inverted for comparators or repeaters, or lit for furnaces. And this way you can actually change their textures depending on them. So let's say that we wanted this thing to be able to be either lit or unlit. We could set our default value here. So normally it will be unlit, and then we can possibly set it to lit later. And then later we would be able to actually set under here, under block states, we can add a block state for when lit is true, and this will basically allow you to override all of these things that we talked about earlier when lit is set to true, versus when lit is not set to true, it will just use the default block state. This is very, very useful, and we'll talk about it later once we're making machines, but I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this property as well. Next up, we're on to animations. Once again, we'll talk about this when we get to custom models, so we're going to skip it and move on to properties. The endgame name, again, self-explanatory, it's how it shows up in your inventory. Now these next ones, hardness and resistance, are actually where I'd recommend bringing the Minecraft wiki back up again, and I'll leave a link to these two pages in the description. But this is the list of vanilla blocks by their hardness, and this basically just controls how quickly you can break them. A higher hardness will make them harder to break. So for instance, obsidian has a very high hardness, it's set to 50, but then something like deep slate redstone is only 4.5. And then for resistance, it is the blast resistance when it gets exploded, and that's on a separate page here. So we can see stuff here like ore is set to 3, or something like ice is only 0.5. Now for these planks, I want to model them off of regular wood. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to look for wood, and this controls all like wood and wooden planks and stuff, and that is set to 2. So I'm going to come and I'm going to set my hardness value to 2. And then for our resistance, we'll do the same thing. And now planks here are set to 3 for their explosion resistance. So I'll set that to 3. This one, of course, will make it unbreakable, so it's like bedrock, it can never be broken. And the luminance will affect how much light is let off by this block. 15 is the maximum light value, and it's the light value that stuff like glowstone outputs, and then, of course, most blocks are set to 0. This light opacity is how much light will be let through this block. Now, 15 means that all light will be blocked by this block, which makes the most sense, but if you're making something like glass, you might want to set this to 0, which means that it will let all of the light through. This gravity toggle will allow you to select whether it should fall like sand or not, and emissive rendering is for things like, for example, magma blocks, which sort of appear to be glowing when you look at them, and they don't really ever look dark, if that makes sense, even when you place them completely in darkness. Is replaceable is for things like grass, for instance, where you can place blocks directly on top of them and they just get deleted. All right, now here under block item properties, this is where we can set our item form of our block, and most blocks, like planks and things, actually have forms that show up in your inventory, items that you can hold, and then you can place them down. Now, if you turn this off, it won't have that, and then it will only be able to be set with things like the set block command or generate it in the world. Most of the time, though, there's no reason you wouldn't just leave this on. And these are all options that are the same as when we were making items. And if you need clarity on any of these, you can go back to my items tutorial, which was episode 1. Now let's pick the creative inventory tab that it's added to. So I'm just going to add it to the end update one that we have here. And now we have our dropping properties. So this custom drop up here will make it not actually drop itself and drop a different block instead. This could be for things like campfires, where they don't actually drop a campfire, they drop coal. So you can make this drop a different block. And you can also set the amount that it drops. Now if you set this to like 2 or something, you'll have an infinite duplication glitch, because every time you break it, you'll get 2 back of the same thing. But if I wanted to make this like an ender pearl fragment, for instance, then every time you break this block, you'd get 2 ender pearl fragments instead of the block back. But I'm going to just turn this back to 1 and get rid of that so it drops itself. Additionally, you can make it use a custom loot table. And we're actually going to talk about loot tables later in this episode in order to make them drop random items. And this experience amount is how much experience will be dropped when you break the block. And this is good for ores, which we'll talk about later. Creative pick item controls what you get when you use the middle mouse button to copy a block that you're looking at. And this could be good for items that have different states that are technically different items, but you want to make sure that you always get the normal one. But if we were to set this to a different block, then you would get that block instead when you middle mouse button on it. These next 3 have to do with what tool will break it. So I'm going to set the tool able to destroy it to an axe, which means that it'll be more efficient when it's broken with an axe. Now if you check this box and then set a vanilla tool tier, it means that you will need at least that tier in order for it to drop. And this is good for things like ores, where you need at least an iron pickaxe to mine diamond. So you could have this on like pickaxe and then iron, but this is just wood. You should be able to break it with your fist. So I'm just going to turn this off. But by leaving this at axe, it will still be more efficient to break when using an axe. Next up down here, we have our sound properties. In here, you can choose what your block is most closest to, and this will change the sounds of the block. So I'm going to set this to wood, since it's obviously wood, or you can also define custom sounds. If you click on this, you'll have to set one for each of these sounds, but you can actually click this pencil here and pick a custom sound at all that's in the game. And we'll talk about later in the series how to add your own sounds, your own custom sounds from your computer, but I'm going to go back to just vanilla wood sounds. Next up, under advanced properties, we have more different options. Now this tick right here will actually make the block update every this amount of ticks, and you can use this when you're making procedures in order to have this block carry out functionality every certain amount of time. This tick randomly is like how blocks will randomly grow. It will only tick every random amount of time, and you could turn this on instead of the tick rate. Again, these are more advanced properties that we're not really going to look at. Block color on the map here is what color your block actually looks like when you look at it on a map. So I'm going to set this to magenta, because our block is kind of magenta looking. And for the note block instrument, I'm going to set this to bass, which is the instrument that plays when you put a note block on top of this block. And bass is the one that plays once you put wood under anything. Slipperiness here is a value from 0 to 2. And if we increase this, it will actually make it more slippery, like ice. Ice is 0.89, just for reference. The jump and speed factor are only used in vanilla for honey blocks, and it controls how high you jump and how fast you move when you're standing on top of this block. So you can make this like honey. When you're standing on it, you'll jump less high, but obviously we're going to leave this at 1 since we're just making planks. Can plants sustain on this block will track whether or not you can place plants like grass and flowers on top of this block. And the beacon color modifier is what color will be set when you place it on top of a beacon. Like how if you place different colors of glass on top of a beacon, it will change the color of the beam. You can make that happen here too. Does this block act like a ladder? If you check this, you'll be able to climb up the block just like a ladder, but your bounding box will have to be less than a full block. So if you wanted to make something like a ladder, you could set the maximum Z coordinate to like 1. That way it'll be a very thin box, and when you walk up it, you'll be able to climb it like a ladder. But of course, this isn't what we want for our block, so I'm just going to put this back off. The enchantment power bonus controls what will be granted to enchantment tables when you place it around them. So normally in vanilla, this would be like for bookshelves. Bookshelves are set to 1, but you can go higher than this to make it better than a normal bookshelf. Reaction to being pushed affects what happens when a piston pushes it. So if you click destroy, this will act like a melon or a pumpkin, where it will just get deleted and it won't actually be pushed. Block will act like obsidian, where it will not be able to push. Push only will mean that you can push it, but you can't pull it back with sticky pistons. And this is for stuff like glazed terracotta. And this AI path node will affect how mob AI reacts to this block. Most of the time you want to leave this on default, but mobs will treat certain blocks differently. Like they'll avoid powdered snow and lava, and generally won't walk over rails. So if your block is any of these types, you might want to just set it to this type. Block can be stripped into. This is good for logs, and this will mean that once you right click on this block with an axe, it will be turned into this block. So just like how you strip logs. Now over here for redstone properties, we can make redstone connect to this block. So for things like buttons and levers, where redstone will be redirected into the block, whether or not it emits redstone. So this could be for things like redstone blocks that actually give out an active redstone signal, and then you can set the amount of redstone signal that it will actually give out. Now whether whether this block can be fertilized with bone meal means if you can use bone meal on it. So like crops, for example, you can use bone meal on. And I've said this before, but all of these procedure ones will make sense once we talk about procedures, and you'll know how to use them then. For this one, it's pretty much useless until you are able to actually make it do something once you use bone meal on it. So again, we're going to ignore it. Now this flammability is actually very good, and this is going to be useful for our block since it should be able to catch on fire. So we're going to say, yes, it can be ignited by lava. And then we have to set the flammability. And now logs by default are 5 and planks are 20. Not really sure where those values come from, but it does control how likely the block is to catch on fire. So I'm going to set this to 20. And then for the fire spreading, we're just going to leave it at 0 so it gets handled like a vanilla block. Next up, block entity. We're going to pretty much completely ignore this tab because this is all for GUIs and for blocks with properties, which we're going to get into in the next couple episodes. Same with energy and fluid storage. This is for mods that have machines with energy or stuff like fluid tanks, but again, we're going to ignore this because we're not making a machine or anything fancy just yet. Triggers are similar to an item. You can do things when all of these individual things happen. And generation, we're actually going to look at in just a minute, and this will affect how it generates in the world. And this is used for ores. But again, this is a pretty basic block, so we're all done with it. Just gonna come up here, save mod element. And the next thing I'd like to do is to make a log. And instead of going through all that from scratch again, we're going to use one of these features over here on the left. So we'll just click on this, click on duplicate right here. I'm gonna call this an ender log. And now we have this ender log. But of course, it's not the exact same as the planks, so I want to change it a little bit. Gonna click on it here, and this is actually going to have a full model because planks, their top and their bottom are different. They're not the same on every side. So I'll click on this one and we'll get rid of this texture, and I'm going to actually import the other textures that I made for the ender log. So I'll click on this left here. I'm going to import the ender log side and just click on it here. And now for the top and bottom, I'm just gonna click on the bottom, import the ender log top. And once again, of course, you can be creating these textures from scratch. You don't have to import them like I'm doing. But if you want these textures, I will leave a Google Drive link in the description with all of the textures for this whole mod that we're going to be using throughout the series. And you'll be able to download them and copy them if you so choose. The only other thing we have to change on this page is going to be the rotation mode. And we're going to pick log rotation because we want this to act like a log and rotate like a log so that you can place it sideways and such. And then of course, we don't want this called endered planks. We want this called an ender log. And the blast resistance for wood is actually a little lower. It's set to 2 instead of 3. So I'm going to just set that there. And the only other thing that I would maybe consider changing for this log would be what the block can be stripped into. So I challenge you guys to make a stripped version of this log if you're following along exactly with the tutorial. And I will also provide the textures for that in the Google Drive folder as well. But anyway, this one's done too. Just going to click on save. And now we have our log as well. Another thing that I'd like to point out now that we have a couple different items that are added in our creative tab is this little button up here, which will allow us to change the order of items showing up in our creative tab. So a lot of times you'd want to put like the blocks first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just because I think it looks nicer to have the items second, but you can reorder these however you want and then just save layout. Now for this next section, I'm going to be talking about ores and how to make ores generate in your world. And to do this, I've actually added this endmium ore right here, which is just a basic block. The only things that I've changed really from the default is I have made it glow a little bit by giving it 4 luminance, so it'll emit a light level of 4. I've also made it only drop if you use at least an iron pickaxe on it. But now let's make it generate in the world. So we're going to come over to generation here and we're going to check to enable ore generation in the world. Now under blocks, this block can replace. By default, this is set to stone. This little tag here means stone. I'm going to be talking about tags in the next episode, but this is an end ore. It's supposed to spawn in the end dimension. So I'm going to delete this and I'm actually going to add end stone. I can just search for end stone and we'll add it there. Restriction biomes will set the biomes that this can generate in. So if we wanted this to only spawn in certain end biomes, we could do this, but I'd like this to spawn everywhere in the end, so I'm just going to leave this empty. Now under generation shape, this is the way that ores generate. All that you really need to know for this one is that you should probably set it to triangle. This is the new ore generation system that's been used since 1.18, and this effectively means that between this minimum and maximum generation height, the heights in the middle will be the most likely to spawn the ore. So if you go to the far bottom of where it will generate, there'll be less, and if you go to the far top, there'll be less, and it will gradually get more and more ore as you get towards the middle. And since this is an end ore, I'm actually going to set this to uniform instead of triangle, which means that ores will be evenly distributed. So there'll be just as much at the far bottom as there will be at the top, instead of having more in the middle. Speaking of this, I know that the end islands are often above 64, so I'm just going to make this 256, just so that it can be pretty much anywhere within the end. Next up is the ore groups per chunk and ores in a group. This top one will affect the rarity of your ore and how often you can find it, and the bottom one will affect how many are in the group once you do find it. And a good reference for these is actually this question mark right here. It will show you what the vanilla values are. So I want this to be a little bit rarer than redstone, probably, but not quite as rare as diamond. So I might put this at like a 4. So there'll be about 4 of these per chunk. And then for the average amount of ores in a group, I'm going to set this to like 6. So we'll find about 6 of these in each little group. And then we can just go ahead and save it. But for this block, what I'd like it to actually do, instead of dropping itself, is I would like it to drop some ender pearl fragments and have a chance to actually drop a full ender pearl as well. So normally if you were to set custom drops, you'd go into here, go into properties like we said, and set a custom drop. But like I said, I want it to drop random things. And so in order to do that, we're going to have to create a loot table. So I'm going to click add here, and I'm going to come to loot table. And I'm going to call this the endmium or loot table. And the first thing we have to do up here is set the name, and this will be the block that it's going to correspond to. So I'm going to just select my endmium ore right here, and we're going to leave the table type at block, which is to do with block drops, and the namespace as mod. Now, if you set this to Minecraft actually, and you set this to a block that exists, like for example, I don't know, acacia log, you can actually override the drops of a vanilla Minecraft block. But we're not going to do that here. We're going to set this back to our endmium ore. And now we have to talk about pools and entries. So for loot tables, each one of these pools that you have in here will be rolled between their minimum and maximum amount of times. So if we make this one 3, this loot table will be rolled between 1 and 3 times, and this one will be rolled once. And what happens when you roll a loot table? Well, it will choose one of these entries here based on their weight. So a higher weight means that it'll be more likely to be chosen, and then it will spawn between the minimum and maximum count of items. So I'm going to set this entry item to be our ender pearl fragment, and I'm actually going to set this to only have 1 roll. So we'll only be able to pick 1 of the items in this list. And then I'm also going to add an ender pearl as a possible drop. And you can click this regenerate preview seed here, which will show in this little inventory up here what it could drop. So we'll see this time it's dropping an ender pearl fragment, and we'll regenerate. This time it's dropping an ender pearl. Regenerate. This time it's a pearl fragment. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to make it a little more likely to get the fragments than to get the pearl. So I'm going to set this to 3. And now when we reload, we should see roughly 75% of the time, we should be seeing the fragment. And then sometimes we should still get the pearl. But most of the time it should be the fragment. And we can see that it seems to check out. And I'm going to actually make it 1, 2, 3 fragments. This will mean that every time it rolls the fragment, we could get up to 3 of them. There we go. We got 3 this time. 3, 3, 3, 3. 2 that time. It seemed to really like 3 there for some reason. Now, additionally, one more thing that you might want to do is make this ore affected by silk touch, so that if you break it with silk touch, you get the original ore. In order to do that, I'm going to add another entry, which is just going to be the ore. And we're going to use this over here. So we're going to say only with silk touch, and we're going to set the other 2 to only without silk touch. And this way it won't really work in the preview, but if we break this block with silk touch, we'll always get this one, because these 2 are invalid when we have silk touch, and same way the other way around. We'll never get this if we don't have silk touch. And this is our loot table. Additionally, I would also check both of these are affected by fortune, which means that you'll get more drops if you have fortune on them. And we're just going to save it. Now, in order to apply that to our ore, we can click on the ore, come over to our properties, check here, use custom loot table for drops. And this will just gray out all of these. And also I'm going to set the experience amount so that it can drop experience when you break it. Just going to make this between 1 and 5 XP points. Seems pretty good to me. And we'll go ahead and save it up. And that should be our ore all done. And now let's demo it in game. So just come up here to the play button once again, and we'll wait for the game to launch. All right, and here we are back in our little testing world. And if we head to our creative tab and check it out, we have our new blocks. We have the log, the planks, and the ore. Now the planks are very simple, of course. They look like planks, they work like planks, they sound like planks. Pretty awesome. And the log should be much the same, but also it rotates depending on which direction you place it on, which was one of the features that we added. Now for the ore, I think we should actually check out this conveniently placed end portal over here and go try to find some ourselves. Now we made it pretty rare, so it might be pretty hard to find, but if we fly around a little bit around this island, we should at least find some. And yep, here's some right here. Now I'm gonna actually test this in survival mode with a pickaxe. So I'm going to get a stone pickaxe, which shouldn't be able to break it, and then an iron pickaxe, which should be, and I'm going to head into survival. And if we were to mine this with the iron pickaxe, there we go, we got an ender pearl. Now, that was only 1 there, so I'm going to just place a couple more to demo it here. If we break it with a stone pickaxe, it doesn't give you anything. Iron pickaxe, there we go, we got a fragment that time. We got 3 fragments that time, and there we go. You can see we're getting our variety of loot from our loot table. Okay, but what if we were to mine it with silk touch? Let's just enchant our pickaxe here with silk touch and mine our block again. And there we go, we get the block back, just as you would expect. But anyway, guys, that is going to be it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and in the next one, we're going to be looking at how to actually add crafting and recipes to your mod. So make sure that you're subscribed so that you see that. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and have a great rest of your day. If we turn this box off, it will actually... I really need a drink. Hold on, got a bubbly. Ah, much better.